Hey guys, good morning. This is Arun. Welcome to the SmackDown 2. And we are going to go over the second part of the SmackDown, basically looping. About the speaker myself, I am Arun Bandaru, ETL developer at Pragmatic Works. Today we will go over how we can loop through different files and load it into a table. Here is the way we do it. Here is my table, here is my file. For example, there is a scenario you're receiving multiple files, multiple product files from different locations. You need to load this into your table on a daily basis. So how would you do it? Basically, if you see my screen, on my screen you're seeing at, let me show you the source files. Here is the files that are coming and landing into our directories from different locations. They are called product files. Here is the files. If you're seeing on this, these are called product 1, 2, and 3. These files come from different locations, and we need to load this into a table. How do we do this in Informatica? Is through a concept called file list. File list is nothing but through a list of all the files. So the mapping here looks straightforward. It is my mapping that loads into the file into the table. It reads from a single file. Note that it's not reading from multiple files. It's just reading from a single file and passing it through the expression transformation and loading into the table. So the main configuration here is not in the mapping level, but in the session, where you do load from multiple files into your target. You can load into a relational target, or you can create one more target file. So you can do whatever you want. So imagine a scenario where we need to load all these product files into a target, relational target. So here is my session that calls this particular mapping, load file list into a table. The mapping is straightforward. It reads basically from the file and loads into the target. And if you go into the session now, we have a property called file list. In the source qualifier, we have the sources here. The input type is a file. If it is a relational, we have the relational. If we have the comment, we have the comment as here, as you know. The main catch here is setting your file type to be indirect rather than direct. What does it mean? Direct means, okay, this is a direct file. It needs to be loaded into my target. If you say indirect, that means it's not the actual file. There are other files that needs to be loaded. And how do you define the files that need to be loaded? Is through the source file name, which is basically a file list. Here, if you see here, there is a property called source file name. We define a file list here, products file list.txt, for example. So what does this contain? This should contain all your product files. Basically, they should contain the absolute path on your server where the files are going to land. So if you see here, these are the product files that I get every day, and this is a product file list. So if you see here, this is an absolute path to all the files that come in to my source directory. So in the future, if you need to have, if you need to get multiple, if you need to have more product files from different regions, you can just append to this file list file with the absolute location of all the file names that you're going to get. And Informatica is going to take care of reading this file list at one time and populating your target, reading through these different files. So here you see that I'm saying, okay, my source file is a file list, and it's an indirect source. It's not a direct source, but an indirect source. And I want this to be loaded into this particular table. This is called products file list. I just named it as products load from file list, just for the demo purpose. So let's go and see how this runs at runtime. If you see the product file list, this has all the 3 files here. And if you go through the content, basically they are all the same files. Just copied them for the demo purpose here. If you see, there are 77 records in each file. products 1, products 2, and products 3. So the main catch here is all the files should have the same structure. They should not differ, otherwise it's going to error out in your Informatica when you run your workflow. So you need to make sure that all your file structures are the same and they match your target. And if you're dropping something from some files, that is fine. But you need to make sure that all the files should have the same type of content and same file layout. That is why, because you define your sources here to have these particular columns in each file. So that's the reason that all the files should have the same type of structure, and you can load it into your target or a flag file or a relational thing, whatnot. So let me go ahead and kick off this particular mapping on the session. I'm kicking this off. Let's go and see. Okay. So here is the guy, file list in the table, and she created 231 rows. Basically, we have 77 records in each file. So 77 times 3 is 231, and let us see if everything has made it into the table or not. So we are in this database. Select star from our table, target table, products, load file from file list. Okay, so let's do I'm selecting from a table, Northwind, dbo.product load from file list. And this is in our target is results. Oops, okay. I don't need to specify this now because it's in a different database. Okay, here's our target table that contains the records from these particular files. If you see here, there are 231 rows. We have loaded all these rows into the target, and we have done this through the Informatica property known as the file list property that is available in Informatica. There is also different ways to do it. We can read three different source files and load it. But if you keep adding multiple files, as I said, if you're adding more regions to your warehouse, then you want to make sure your code doesn't need to be modified all the time. So you can just read from this file list property that you set it up here. You can edit your file list basically and make sure everything from the files is loaded into the target table. So this is an important feature that is available in Informatica that can loop through different files and load it into your target table. So this is how we do it, and now I'll transfer it over to Jason, who will tell you how to do it in SSIS.
All right. Can everyone see my screen? Arun, can you see my screen right now?
Yeah. All
right. Now, I will admit that my demo doesn't go quite as deep as yours does, Arun. I'm not actually going to load it into the table, but I am going to show everyone how this is all done up to that point. So within integration services, it's pretty simple as well. What you end up doing is if you want to do any sort of file loads, you're going to do it through a looping mechanism. And that's the for each loop looping mechanism that you can find easily on the toolbox. When you go into the for each loop for doing any of this looping and running through all the files, what you can basically do is on the general tab, there's not much that you got to do there. You know, put in whatever name you want to give there to make it nice and descriptive. That works pretty good if you're going to use BI Documenter in the back end on all this. But then you're going to go and you're going to do your collection of items. And your collection in this case is going to be SQL Server files. Well, it's going to be files, and I'm going to actually just pull through and bring in some files from another presentation just to loop through. But you'll decide on what enumerator you want. And in this case, we're going to use the for each file enumerator. There's a number of other things that you can loop across. but it does default to the for each file enumerator. And then you put in where you want to go to, the extension you want to use, whether you want to fully qualify just the name only or name and extension, so you know what you want out of the file. Since we want the actual files that are out there, we're going to do fully qualified. And then we just choose traverse subfolder. And at that point, what it's going to do is go out there, it'll grab all the files that are there, and you've got a list that's going to sit in memory in your SSIS package that brings in all of this information. Now what you're going to want to do is get that file name out. And you do that just by using a variable mapping. So you select a variable that you want to use. If you don't have one created already, you can use new variable. And then just set it to an index value of 0. And that just tells the control, hey, you know, this value that's coming in, just pass it to this variable and we'll use it. Now at this point, we run it and we would get all of the files that match that set of values. And in this case, depending upon what kind of work you want to do, if you want to do a data flow, if you want to do some sort of FTP task, or whatever you want to do, you can just drop that inside the for each loop container. And in this case, we'll just look at each one of these and bring it in and just throw a conditional split on it, not do anything too extravagant with those. But what we want to do is be able to import those. So what we'll do is take and create a connection. And if this will open up here. Oops. We'll have a flat file connection, but this flat file connection won't actually have a file name that's associated with it. And it's going to, just for sake of our presentations, I'll drive out to the folder that I'm going out to and grab one of those SQL files. And let's do this. We'll get this all set up here and get that going. And now that we know we've got our connection created, let's bring up the properties for it. And what we end up doing with the properties to map it into the variable that's part of the for each loop container is we're going to use that variable as the connection string. So we just take that connection string that comes from the for each loop container, attach it to the connection for the flat file, and then we can use the flat file down here. Let's just get past those. And in this case, we can just run it, and it's going to loop through all the files that are out there and just push them into there. And it errored out because I'm using .SQL files. I actually don't have the same list of data files that Arun is using here today. But hopefully you guys can see that it's fairly simple in that regards. It's just a matter of a loop, which SQL Server gives you in integration services, and then once you've got that, everything else is up to you. So Arun, I will pass this back to you for the next piece.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for that. Okay, now the second part of this seminar, where we go and find out how we can loop through all the tables in a database and give the record counts and spit it out into a file. This is quite interesting. This is not that easy in the earlier versions without using a stored procedure or something like a function, UDF or something like that. From version 8, Informatica has got a new transformation called SQL transformation that will help you to run your SQL statements on the database at runtime. Basically, if you have to do it in real time, you need to know, earlier versions before 8, if you need to do this, you need to know all your table names up front before you can do this. Running all the count stars against all the tables, we get the record counts. But Informatica version 8, we have a good transformation called the SQL transform that will help you to run your statements on the database at runtime in the middle of a pipeline. So basically, this is my table. I am reading from, this is how the mapping looks like to loop to tables in a database to give the counts. I'm reading from a particular table, the information schema table that's available in all the DBs. Here is my source qualifier looks, how it looks like. I'm just getting the table name. So it's basically getting the table name that particular database has. And this table name is passed as a parameter to the SQL transformation. SQL transformation, if everybody is familiar with it, it has two types of running. I mean, it can run in two different modes. One is the query mode and one is the script mode. Basically, I'm using a query mode to run the queries in the middle of a pipeline. In the script mode, basically what you do is you create tables or drop tables. Basically, you ask the database to run some scripts for you. And here, what we're doing is we're using a query mode with parameter binding or string substitution and getting the stars of all the tables. So here is my query. I'm passing a table name as an input. If you see here, it has a SQL input as a table name. And by default, it creates the error output. If you see here, the SQL transformation has the input ports and the output ports. This is my input. This is my output. Error port is something that is created by default. So I am passing this table name as an input parameter to my source to my SQL transformation. And here is how you set it up. You have your ports. This is the input port table name that is passed as an input, and the error is default. You don't need to do anything with that. Static value. This is something I created as an output port. Where you create all these ports is here, basically the SQL ports. I created a static value, basically that says record count is a static value that basically tells, okay, this table name record count is such. That's what I want to achieve through this particular transformation. And record count is the count star, that's the second field in the query you're seeing here. So this is a query. You can write it down in your editor browser. Basically, that tells you you can write as many number of queries as you want. Make sure they all run before you want to actually run it through the SQL transformation. So I say, okay, select record count is count star from this particular database, and the table name is something I'm passing as a parameter. So if you see that this table name has tildes around it, it basically tells that this is a string substitution, and the table name is coming as an input parameter. And Informatica, when it creates this, it passes on this query onto the database. So the database will run this and give us an output, which will be passed to your flat file target or whatever, wherever you want to store this information. This is, we are using it in a query mode, and we are using the dynamic SQL, basically for every row. So that is why dynamic SQL that changes for every row, and then you pass it on to your target. And if you see here, the first value that I am passing is a table name. This is some dummy flat file, and I'm passing the table name as an input first, and then I'm saying the table name static value here is basically a hard-coded value that tells you record count is. This is a string that is a static value that I'm passing, and then the record count is actual count from the table, count of records from the table I'm passing on. So this is how a mapping looks like through SQL transformation, using SQL transformation. Let me go to my workflow. Okay, here you're saying this is a session that call this particular source SQL transform to count the number of rows in tables in a particular database. And here if you're seeing, here is my database is Northwind. My source database is Northwind. I want to read from this particular source database, get the count of records from each table, and write it to a flat file in my target file directory. In the target file directory, and this is my output. SQL trans.txt is my output. Okay. So now let us run this. And if you see that Okay, so this one is running and it succeeded. And we have 31 rows, so that means we have 31 objects, 31 tables, and used in our database, not with. And let's go to the target directory and see where this file is returned. So go to my target files, and this is my output that is created now. Okay, so here is one that tells you basically, okay, categories table record count is 8, customers record count is 91, shippers, these are all the tables that are available in the database, and it does the count at one time and gives you the count. So the way I achieved it is through passing these categories as an input, table name as an input, and this record count is a static value that I have put in just to make it more understandable. And then I say the count, the actual value is 8. So these are all the record counts in the table. Basically, this is how we can do it through SQL transformation. We can also do it through calling the system tables, which is a pain unless you know well about the sys indexes, sys objects, and all those. So the second way we can do this is through another way to do it is calling system tables. Most of us have difficulty understanding the system tables because they have their own model, and it's not that we often work with the system tables. So, but here's the way how we do it through reading from the system tables, the indexes, sys indexes tables. I'm doing it. Here is a source qualifier. I have an override, sorry. Let me open that mapping. Okay, this is how we do it through the SQL override. This is how we read from the sys objects and the sys indexes tables. And then this is something that's complicated unless you know about the indexes and the objects. It's difficult to get through and understand how you can get this information. But this is one way of getting all your counts. And this one loads into your target table the same way. Basically, I have another session that reads from the system tables and generate the output. And if I run this, it's going to run the session and generate the output. It's the same way basically. And if you see here, this is the one, record counts and all this. So I find the second way of doing quite difficult because I'm not too interested in knowing about system tables. And sometimes people want to go through the system tables and understand their repository or whatever. So we have a new product that's free to download on our website that helps you understand your Informatica environment within minutes, basically. So what it does is basically it loops through all the Informatica repository tables and gives you the information within minutes that you can slice and dice and find out how complex is your environment. So the product is called the Workflow Profiler. This helps you basically to profile your Informatica repository and understand how complex is your environment. This is very helpful for people who are just onboarding onto your environment, or for people who are there for a long time, wanted to know how good is their environment. This is a very good tool, free of cost, available on the website Pragmatic Works. Basically, it helps you to profile your Informatica workflows in the sense that it helps you to create a list of all the repository objects at the lowest level of transformations. And Informatica has this repository table sitting behind the scenes, and whenever you're modifying your mappings, creating new objects, everything gets loaded into these repository tables. So the profiler helps you to understand what's being created, what's available in your repository, analyze the objects, and how much they are used within your repository. And it can also help you to document your workflows. It can also help you to document all your workflows. And here is how a sample output looks like. For example, this is the profile of all the work that you have in your repository. I'm taking a simple workflow and I'm trying. This is how it shows a pie chart about the widget usage, which are nothing but your transformations, and the tasks usage. And this is a very good handy tool to understand the repository information. And then we also have another thing, like it tells you the connection distribution, and it tells you the widget distribution and summary report. Basically, you can export this into a PDF, Excel, and it's very handy. And also, there is one more feature we are adding very shortly after this. It's called the execution summary. That basically tells you how your workflows are running, what time they have run out, and it gives you all the historical reporting on the run times and the load times and how many reports were loaded. If you see here the source success rows, target success rows, target failed rows, and the messages if there are any failed sessions. I know this can be done through different metadata queries, but this is a handy tool that will help you to get your information within minutes. So this is Profiler. This is available for free download on our website. Basically, all you need is access to the Informatica repository and of course the Profiler software that's available on our website. And it's a free download. It's available on pragmaticworks.com/products and the workflow profiler. So if anybody is interested, then definitely go through this, go to the website, download the workflow profiler. All you need access is to your Informatica repository, and then you can run the software against your repository and get the information. So with this being said, I'll now hand it over to my colleague, Jason, to go over how we do the looping of these tables to get the counts. And Jason, now yours, all yours now.
All right. All right. So with looping over the tables, it's about as easy as it is to loop over files as well. Not quite as many steps as it takes for doing it within Informatica. So I'm going to just show you here is we're going to use this for each loop container again, and basically we're going to bring that down into the workflow or into the control flow here, and we just open that up and modify the properties to change what the connection is coming from. Now when we want to get all of the tables, and this can be something where you need to go and you need to archive everything from a specific set of tables, or if you just need to do some analysis and pull down some information about your database. In this case, what we're going to use is the Sml Enumerator. And the Sml Enumerator gives you all of the objects within SQL Server. And in this case, we only care about the tables. And so with this Sml Enumerator, we can just go through every single specific type of object that's there and pull that information out. And so what we're going to do here, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger on the side there. Perfect. And I'll zoom in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just go to the master database. We're going to pull back all of the objects, which is in this case going to be just tables. And then from all the object types that are out there, we're going to pull back all the table names. Now this bit may seem a little bit complicated on the surface, but you can go out onto Bing or out onto Books Online and easily find how to navigate through all the SMO objects to pull back anything that's out there. Lots of people have written about it in blogs, posts, and in articles on different websites. So this information it looks a bit cryptic to start with, but it is fairly easy to get into. Once you have that, then we're ready to map that variable into that collection of values into a variable, and so we can map it into a table name variable. Or if you wanted to, of course, you could get any name that you wanted to, and then map it to index level 0. And the reason why there are multiple values allowed here in the index level 0 is that sometimes what you're looping over does have multiple columns, depending upon some other use patterns. And so that isn't something that's just kind of wonky. It is actually, this can actually be very useful to have multiples when you have different record sets that have multiples. And in this case, though, we do only have the table name coming back. So with that table name coming back, we can go out and use a SQL statement to pass that in back into a table on our system. We'll just pass in the table name. and then do the same thing that we did before, where we're looping and we're passing it all into a specific connection. In this case, we're just doing one connection, so there's no variables or expressions on the connections. It's just pretty straightforward here that we're going to go in. And if we go in, let's just make sure our table here is empty. There you go. You guys can first see that there is nothing in the table. We can run through that, and in very short order it's looped through all the variables. We can see in the progress that each of the tables were looped across, or at least that it was done 6 times, and that it started with 6 values. Go back out to Query Management Studio here, and we can see all 6 tables. And this is a fairly easy workflow if you compare it to, say, the Informatica one that Arun was showing. There's not much to it. Integration Services does make things pretty dang simple when it comes to all this. And at this point, I think I can hand it back to either Arun or Rachel, because I think we've covered the 2 demos that we're going to be covering today, or 2 sets of demos.
Okay, great. Arun, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think we're fine. If anybody is interested, and we have the software available free of cost on our website.
Okay, great. And if anyone has any questions, type them into the question panel now. I'll leave it up for a couple seconds so that anyone who has a question can get it answered. Now's your chance. All right. I don't think we have any questions. You guys are pretty comprehensive. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Jason and Arun, for those excellent demos.